Hi there, I appreciate everyone who has joined. We'll be giving everyone roughly an extra minute or so before we start to allow a few others to join. In the meantime, I appreciate everyone's patience, and we'll start in roughly 60 seconds. Thank you. I appreciate everyone who has joined. We'll begin in roughly 30 seconds or so to allow a few others before we begin. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Ed LaCroix and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing here at AlertLogic. AlertLogic is the leading provider of threat intelligence, managed detection, and response services. Today we are hosting Why You No Longer Need a SIEM Tool, presented by our Chief Strategist, Matt Selheimer. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Make sure your system sound is adjusted correctly. You can enter questions at any time during the presentation and we'll have time at the end to address them. If we are unable to get to your question in time, we will follow up with you directly to provide a response. We will also provide the slides and presentation link to all attendees. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Matt Selheimer. Matt helps to lead go-to-market strategy and the voice of the customer for AlertLogic. Previously held strategy, go-to-market, biz dev, and engineering roles for VMC Software, Informatica, and Compact Computer. He led the effort to build first integration of security and IT operations data in a single event console with Symantec and VMC around 2004. Former SAP Basis Administrator, consultant, designed over 150 SAP deployments. Previously data center operations and Microsoft certified systems engineer, and a believer in the Agile Manifesto principle, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Matt to begin our session. Matt, you may begin.
Great, thank you, Ed, and thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar today. We've got a number of items prepared to share with you, and we hope that you find it useful and helping to address some of the challenges and needs that you have around cybersecurity. First, I always like to start with a little bit of humor and give you a moment on the webinar here to read this Dilbert comic. Some of you may have seen this one before. It's a bit funny, but it's not too far from the truth. I truly empathize with all of you whose day jobs it is to help manage the security and compliance for your organizations. There is a wide gap between the understanding that leadership often has about the day-to-day challenges of securing organizations and the reality of the resources and people that we're given in order to be able to effectively do so. And really the key point here is that cybersecurity for many organizations is really harder than it should be. And we in the cybersecurity community need to do a better job, a more effective job of helping to make security easier and compliance easier than it is today. Our subject today is SIEM tools and why you no longer need a SIEM tool. So I thought it'd be good to start with a definition just to get us all on the same page around what is a SIEM tool. This is as good a definition as I think is out there from Gartner. I'll just read the first part of it to you. I won't read the whole thing, but I think the first paragraph gives a nice concise summary that security and information event management is defined as the need to analyze event data in real time for early detection of targeted attacks and data breaches, and to collect, store, investigate, and report on log data for incident response, forensics, and regulatory compliance. Key features of SIEM tools are their ability to aggregate that event data as well as to combine event data with contextual information about users, assets, threats, and vulnerabilities. So before we dive into more specifics around SIEM, I thought it would be good just to do a quick polling question and to ask all of you, what are your views on SIEM tools, and to choose the best response. So we've just activated the polling here on the webinar. You should be able to see an opportunity for you to provide your response to this question. Do you find, A, that SIEM tools are easy to get up and running and get value from? Do you find that they're challenging to get up and running and get value from? Have you perhaps not implemented a SIEM tool before, but you've heard they're pretty easy? Or have you not implemented a SIEM tool before, but have heard that they can pose significant difficulties? So if everybody could just take a moment here to respond to the polling question, and then I'll make a few comments based on the responses from the group. So we seem to be seeing a pattern already in the initial responses. I want to give it a little bit more time for folks to vote. We've got about 20 or so folks who voted so far. I want to give it just a few more seconds for a few others to chime in. All right, we'll leave the voting open just a little bit longer while I start to make some comments here. So it seems to be a pattern in this group at least is that SIEM tools are either you've experienced that they're challenging to get them up and running and get value from, or you've not implemented one but you've heard that there are significant difficulties. When you combine responses B and D, we're looking at 84% of those of you who submitted a response to the poll indicating that SIEM tools have been challenging your experience, or what you've heard from colleagues who've tried to implement SIEM tools. And so we're going to go ahead and we'll stop the voting now, and then I want to share some additional perspective. In preparation for the webinar, I just went out and did a quick Google search on the phrase SIEM fail, and not knowing exactly how many responses that was going to drive, was not entirely surprised to see over 500,000 responses online to that phrase SIEM fail. And if we look at SIEM success, we see a substantially, even larger number of Google search hits, 3.3 million hits. But I think that's interesting because that, to me, is indicative of the data that we just saw in the poll, that folks are trying to achieve success with SIEM tools and not finding it particularly easy to do so. So between, SIEM fail and SIEM success, nearly 4 million hits on the internet in terms of those two keywords. And if we look again at what Gartner has to say, in a couple of recent studies that Gartner published in May of 2017 and November of last year, Gartner reaches much the same conclusion based on their client inquiries, that implementing SIEM solutions continues to be difficult, often with failed or stalled deployments, even after a year or more of effort. And that managing and using a SIEM is difficult once organizations are able to get them up and running, and oftentimes the value is far less than what's expected, being limited to minimal value deployments. And so what we see is that despite the fact that SIEM tools have been around for well more than a decade, organizations are really struggling with being able to get them deployed and get value from them. In another research note, Gartner talks about their experience in working with clients, and what they see is the 6 most common pitfalls of SIEM projects. And what's interesting, if you take a look at the 6 items here on your screen, is that 4 out of those 6 are directly related to the client, to the Gartner client and their challenges, not necessarily to the tools, right? So you see the first one around, performing detailed planning before purchasing a SIM tool, really, making sure that the scope of what the SIM tool is being expected to do is clearly defined, that it's not overly simplistic, but then also having, the right amount of resources. So having insufficient resources is a common pitfall to be able to continue to maintain and tune the SIM tool deployment. It's really only on pitfall number 4 and number 5 that Gartner really tries to call out the SIM tools themselves as contributing to project pitfalls. And we see this with our customer base, that being able to really separate the noise from what really matters, that many customers have challenges with just the amount of alerts that SIM tools throw off. And I'll share a real-world example here in a moment, as well as, despite the fact that lots of data has been aggregated together, there isn't always a sufficient context to be able to understand and interpret the alerting information, the event information that's commonly found in SIM tools. So I thought would be useful next would be to do another quick poll and to take a look at, for those of you who have had experience with SIM tools, what have been your biggest challenges? So looking at those pitfalls that Gartner calls out, which of those have been challenges for you? And this particular polling question is a choose all that apply question. So select as many of the choices of A through E as are appropriate based on your experience. So have you experienced that insufficient resources has been a significant challenge, or the monitoring noise that I spoke about, or effectively planning the SIM project before going out and purchasing one or more tools? So we'll just give it a minute here for folks to respond to this polling question. Give it about another 15 seconds or so. We're still getting a number of responses coming in here. Looking very interesting so far. All right, I'm going to let the voting continue for just a little bit longer, but to start to talk about some of the results that we're seeing here. So not surprising, the number one response in terms of challenge is insufficient resources. We see this time and time again, despite the fact that security is seen as a high priority for many organizations from the board level all the way down. Most of the individuals that we work with who have responsibility for cybersecurity in their organization report back that they just don't have sufficient resources, whether those resources are people, whether those resources are budget, or a combination of both people and budget. We continue to find that is the number one challenge that organizations are seeing. Monitoring noise is typically the second challenge that I hear about most frequently. Many organizations, the challenge is related to the insufficient resources. They don't have the ability to have full 24/7, monitoring, and so it becomes difficult to have eyes on the alerts that are being triggered by SIM tools, and it makes it harder to have the time to really separate the needles from the haystack, so to speak. Also, another common response that we see is the planning before buying tools, and oftentimes this is precipitated by some sort of an event. So, an organization may have experienced a breach, or there may have been an audit finding, or some sort of event that's really driving the security team to look to purchase additional tools. And sometimes those purchasing decisions can, as a result, feel rushed because the organization is trying to respond to that breach event or that audit finding as quickly as possible. And we see scoping and lack of context kind of rounding out the fourth and the fifth common challenges. So let me share with you, let's go ahead and stop the voting, and then let me go ahead and share with you a real-world example. So this is actually from one of AlertLogic's customers. And what they shared with us was that depending upon the number of tools that they might be looking at, so not only the SIEM tool itself, but perhaps other types of tools to feed data into the SIEM tool. Those could be log managers, for example, or a web application firewall, or vulnerability scanning system, etc. That as much as a third of the SIEM project time was actually taken up by evaluating those tools by typically 5 potential vendor options for each particular tool. The second thing that they found was that there was a significant amount of integration effort and maintenance associated with their SIEM deployment. In the case of this particular organization, it's 7 different business units, 40 different offices, 4,500 employees, and so the time and the effort that they had to spend in local log storage, being able to size that from a server and storage capacity requirements to manage the server and storage associated with the log data that was being pulled into the SIEM tool, the time and the effort that it took to deploy different agents, to manage those agents, and to do that across disparate platforms and versions, as well as the time to actually design and kick off the project, design the project, roll out the project. For them, it actually took 3 quarters. It took 9 months of time for them just to be able to get the log data feeding into their SIEM tool. And what they found that was that they also had to spend a significant amount of time in configuring the SIEM tool to be able to reduce the noise, to tune the SIEM tool, and also to be able to have the staffing in place in order to be able to manage the configuration. They finally got to a place where they were able to do a manual review of alerts in their SIEM tool twice a day. They could never quite get to the ability to do full 24/7 always on monitoring of what their SIEM tool was actually capable of showing them. And so just to kind of put a finer point on it from a staffing standpoint, it took 2 full-time equivalent employees for them to plan, execute, and manage the rollout of the SIEM tool. And then once they were able to roll it out, it took 1 full-time equivalent employee to manage the tooling, 2 full-time equivalents for the ongoing monitoring and the operational activities associated with it, making sure that that the data feeds were processing, the agents were up and running, and then they also had to dedicate a full-time employee to patching and change management. That was a critical part of the success of their particular project, to really have that dedicated focus from a resource and staffing standpoint around patching and change management, being able to convince people around the IT organization of the importance of patching. The other thing they shared with us was that it took them 4 times the amount of effort to hire security analysts and to be able to retain them as it did an infrastructure engineer or administrator. They also saw that the security analysts that they did hire had the highest turnover rate within their IT organization because of the many external opportunities that are available to people with security skills. I've seen data that indicate that the unemployment rate for people with qualified security credentials is 0.07%, so well south of 1%. Cybersecurity Ventures released a study a few months ago that said by 2021 there are going to be 2.5 million unfilled security analyst jobs worldwide. So there's a huge amount of demand for security analysts, as I'm sure many of you know. And so this was a real practical challenge for them, and basically meant that they were in a permanent state of hiring in order to be able to manage their SIEM tool environment. And kind of to put a summary point on it, despite the fact that they put all this time and effort into their SIEM deployment, after 2 years they really hadn't been able to deliver on that promise despite their best efforts. So I chose a graphic on the right-hand side here. For those of you who have some background in mythology, you may remember the story of Sisyphus, who was condemned every day in the afterlife to roll a stone, a boulder, uphill, only to have that boulder then subsequently roll down and have to repeat the process the next day. And unfortunately, for many organizations, SIM tool projects, SIM deployments feel like that proverbial Sisyphus, having to roll the boulder up the hill each day, only to have to repeat it the next day. And so in our experience, what many organizations have found is that a build your own security model with a SIM tool and an internally developed security operations center at the center is unfortunately a very costly and ineffective proposition, despite the many promises that are out there. Just the time and the effort spent on selection of the tool and the cost of the tools, the integration effort and the maintenance that I talked about, the challenge of trying to have visibility across all these different data feeds and the correlation rules in place, the difficulty of sourcing and retaining staff to maintain and manage your SIM tools in your security operations center, as well as the effort to source your own threat intelligence, continue to make it very difficult for organizations, as we saw in the polling data earlier. Now, many organizations have also looked to an alternative to say, well, why don't we consider a outsourcing approach? Let's look to a traditional security outsourcing organization, to be able to assist us. And what we have found, and what our customers tell us, is that typically is a high cost. So even though it may be a comparable cost to a build your own model, it's still a very expensive cost. They often find that the outsourcer is providing them with alerts rather than verified security incidents. In many cases, the outsourcer is having to support lots of different tools across all their clients, so they take on the burden of managing all those different tools. But what ends up happening is they don't have a high degree of specialization in those tools because they're supporting such a wide number of tools. For organizations that are kind of a mid-sized organization, let's say someone that's maybe between 10 million in revenue and $1 billion or $2 billion in revenue, many of the traditional security outsourcers really cater to very large Fortune 2000 companies. And so what mid-sized organizations often tell us is they feel like if they've worked with a security outsourcer, they end up getting the B team. They don't necessarily get the A team from that outsourcer because they are a smaller client. And ultimately, the proposition of that many outsourcers will say, hey, we'll manage your mess for less, ends up still being a mess on the back end, and the outsourcer is trying to mask, but really is resulting in a large volume of alerts rather than truly verified incidents. And so what I'd like to do now is do one more poll before we talk about an alternative approach, just to kind of get folks' thoughts on the webinar here. How many of you are currently trying to follow a build your own, do it yourself, SIM-centric strategy, whether that's fully deployed or you're in the process of deploying that kind of strategy, or whether or not you are looking at an outsourcing strategy or currently using a security outsourcer, or whether perhaps you fall into the third camp of looking for an alternative to either of these kinds of approaches. So we'll give it a moment for folks to chime in here on our third poll. Give it about another 15 seconds or so. All right, I'll leave the polling open for a little bit longer while I comment. I'm seeing that we've got a pretty good pattern emerging here so far in the folks that have responded. I'm not surprised to see do-it-yourself with a SIM-centric strategy coming up near the top. That's typically what we see when we're out talking to prospective clients. That still seems to be the default approach that many organizations are taking, followed by the outsourcing approach as kind of a secondary approach. But I'm intrigued to see that, and perhaps it's because of the title of this webinar and why you don't need a SIM tool any longer. We're seeing a pretty high, the highest, in fact, response from folks saying they're really looking for an alternative to ARB. And so what I'm going to do is I'll stop the voting now and proceed to kind of share with you what we've been working on at AlertLogic, because what we have recognized is, this challenge, that the existing approaches are really not serving many organizations very well, and that folks are looking for a better way, a better alternative. So what I'd like to share with you in the next few minutes, in the next few slides, is, and hopefully provoke some thinking on your side in terms of what might a better approach look like. And so the approach that we've taken at AlertLogic is to develop a set of curated security technologies. So to really take out a lot of the effort that I was talking about earlier of having to go and select tools, purchase tools, and configure those tools. So what we do at AlertLogic is we provide log management capability, we provide an intrusion detection capability, we provide a vulnerability scanning capability, a web application firewall capability, etc. So we've done the hard work of curating those various different technologies and being able to develop a seamless security model that brings together all of those different data feeds. We manage the data feeds, we manage the agents on behalf of our clients. In the case of some of the data sources like intrusion detection, we do have a software appliance that needs to sit on the network. It's a virtual software appliance that needs to sit on the network, and we take the responsibility for managing that virtual software appliance as well. So the fact that we have these curated technologies and we take on the burden of managing those curated technologies on behalf of our clients means that the amount of effort is significantly reduced. And because we are providing the signatures, the vulnerability information, we're doing the machine learning based anomaly detection and managing all the storage associated with the data and the data feeds and the data analysis, it greatly reduces the amount of effort required for our clients and the staffing requirements for our clients. Additionally, and I'll spend some more time talking about this in a moment, we maintain a security operations center in a follow the sun model. So we actually have 2 security operations centers, one located in the US, one located in the UK. So that avoids the need for you to have to build and staff your own security operations center. But we provide you with access to an incident console so that you can see the benefits of all this aggregation of the data across these curated security technologies. So you can see what incidents are being triggered based on security events. You can see which are being classified by our Security Operations Center as critical, as high, as medium, or low from a risk standpoint. And we are actually going to reach out to our clients proactively whenever we have an incident that reaches that critical or high status. So we have a 15-minute service level agreement with our clients that when our curated technologies and our correlation rules and algorithms identify a critical or a high incident, our Security Operations Center staff are digging into the details on that and then proactively contacting our clients within 15 minutes to let them know about that and to let them know what the remediation guidance is around addressing those issues. So this approach to having a pre-curated stack of security technologies, having the correlation rules defined, having the machine learning algorithms in place, having the Security Operations Center enables us to drive much lower effort, much lower staffing requirements for our clients, as well as much stronger visibility across the security events that are being generated. And we do this across a a very modern and always advancing platform. It's a SaaS-based solution. As you can see with the screenshot there, it's a modern user experience. Here we're showing an example of a topology view. So we're not only presenting information about the incidents and the events that have contributed to those incidents, but we're also giving context for the relationships and dependencies between the various different systems that are affected by a particular incident. And we're supporting this across multiple different cloud environments, so you don't have one set of security tools and one security vendor for AWS and a different one for cloud and Azure and a different one in on-premises, but AlertLogic is helping to support and providing a single incident console interface across multiple different cloud environments as well as on-premises, hosted, and hybrid environments. We also support modern technologies such as containers. So not just supporting traditional physical devices and virtual machines, but also a wide variety of container technologies. And what's important also to mention is that we do this across a broad range of technologies in your technology stack, from package applications and application development platforms to databases and middleware, to operating system level vulnerabilities, your orchestration layers, hypervisors, network devices, cloud platforms, and containers, like I mentioned as well. And what's interesting here is we find that many of our client organizations prior to working with AlertLogic they really struggle to get this level of full stack visibility. In fact, there's one study that shows that application security failure rates on the OWASP top 10 is as high as 60%. In many cases, most organizations are using third-party libraries and third-party elements in their application code these days. They may have insecure configurations. For example, they might have open S3 buckets in AWS environments. Because AlertLogic provides this level of full stack visibility, we're able to recognize whether or not you have known vulnerabilities in third-party code that you might be running, as well as insecure configurations in your environments that require attention. Turning next to a little bit more detail on our Security Operations Center. So as I mentioned, all of the incidents that are raised are triaged. So we use the benefit of our analytics and machine learning to first have a automated way of classifying security events into various different priority levels, and then our Security Operations Center personnel actively investigate every critical and every high incident and have that 15-minute SLA. We have 90 Security Operations Centers employees globally who carry a wide range of security and networking and infrastructure certifications. So they are experts in being able to understand not only security incidents and events, but also the underlying infrastructure. And what they will do is they will provide guidance to you in terms of how you should respond to an incident. In some cases, we might actually take an action on your behalf upon your approval. So, you might say, hey, I want to block traffic from that IP address on the firewall. You may be using AlertLogic's web application firewall, in which case we could actually implement that web application firewall rule. But in most cases, what we find is that what our clients are really looking for us to do is to be able to provide that proactive incident escalation, help manage the incident response process, and give guidance and recommendations on how to address and remediate those incidents, and then leave that to the client to actually execute the remediation guidance, because the client understands the specifics of their environment, their blackout windows, and other policies around change management at a greater level of depth than what one of our security operations staff members would do. So it's really a partnership between our Security Operations Center team and you as a client. Additionally, all of this is fed by the work of our threat intelligence team. So we have more than 36 threat researchers and data scientists that are working actively every day to understand new vulnerabilities and the potential risk associated with those new vulnerabilities. They're using those machine learning algorithms to understand anomalous behavior and identify new threats and new risks and new attack approaches that the hackers are taking, and helping to develop new signatures, new vulnerability scans, new remediation guidance that can be used by our Security Operations Center team. So to know that behind the power of the platform is a set of expert threat intelligence researchers that are really feeding the core security content into the platform to keep it evergreen, to keep it current. One of the challenges that we find in traditional SIEM tool deployments is a reduction in the efficacy associated with that SIEM deployment. So maybe on go live, the SIEM tool has a certain level of efficacy, but over time that efficacy degrades as new attack types emerge, new vulnerabilities emerge. So our threat intelligence researchers are really working on behalf of our clients to make sure that we maintain and increase the efficacy of the threat intelligence and the threat research that we produce over time, so that you don't have to do that you don't have to invest the resources in having to do that. So let me give you an example of this in action. So many of you are probably familiar with the Apache Struts vulnerability that made the headlines in 2017 with one of the leading credit reporting agencies being broadcast in the press as having experienced a breach due to this Apache Struts vulnerability. What's interesting about this particular example is that the AlertLogic threat intelligence researchers had already been addressing this vulnerability and assessing this vulnerability as early as 2013, and had actually developed a signature to be able to identify and block attacks against this vulnerability. And in 2013, had enabled our Security Operations Center personnel around this particular vulnerability, the risks around this vulnerability, and the remediation guidance for our clients. And then that vulnerability actually adapted over time between the period of 2013 to 2017. So when the news actually broke about this high-profile breach in March of 2017, AlertLogic's customers were actually already being protected as early as 4 years prior to this particular headline breach. And what we did was we took the additional step to reassure our customers when this hit the news that they were in fact already protected against this, but if they did have the known vulnerability in their environment, what specific remediation steps, what patching levels they needed to get to in order to be able to remediate against this. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, a new vulnerability in Apache Struts surfaced again, and we've updated our signatures, and we proactively reached out to our customers to make sure that they knew about this updated vulnerability in Apache Struts and what specific remediation steps they should take. So this is a really good example of the power of the approach that AlertLogic takes of bringing together a platform of curated security technologies with the threat intelligence researchers with our Security Operations Center staff in our SOC. The other thing that we do in our approach, which is different from a traditional SIEM tool or outsourcing-based approach, is we take a risk-based outcome approach. So what we do is we work with our clients to really understand, and this is a fictitious but realistic example of how we would work with the client to understand what different types of systems and workloads you have running across various different environments, and how you would categorize those from a risk-based standpoint. Would you categorize them from a very high risk versus high risk to medium risk perspective? And then what we do is we offer 3 different levels of coverage. And so our offering is divided into these 3 different levels of coverage. So starting with essentials, which typically our clients would use for their development and test environments, for non-critical systems, perhaps laptops and workstations, as well as perhaps items, assets in their environment that maybe they're unknown. They don't have a risk profile around those systems. And what our clients would do is use the Essentials offering to be able to do vulnerability scanning of those systems, to understand what known vulnerabilities and the risk associated with those vulnerabilities is there. And what we produce is something we call a threat risk index, which is based on industry standard CVEs and the risk associated with those common vulnerabilities, but also our own proprietary knowledge across our 4,000 plus customers in terms of which vulnerabilities have we actually seen that have transitioned from being a known vulnerability to being actively exploited in the wild, that the hackers are actively going after these particular vulnerabilities. So what we do is we help you establish a baseline understanding of those known vulnerabilities, the risk to your organization from those known vulnerabilities, as well as remediation guidance and prioritization about where you should look to be patching first, second, third, in order to be able to improve the security posture in your organization. The next level is what we refer to as the Alert Logic professional capability. This is typically what our clients would use for their core production systems. This is where we bring in that 24/7 security operations center that I spoke about earlier, so that we're actively monitoring the environment on your behalf. We bring into play our log management capability, our intrusion detection capability, as well as the vulnerability scanning capability that I spoke about at the Essentials level. All of those capabilities are brought together with professional along with the 24/7 SOC monitoring to really give that much broader and deeper coverage for your core production systems. And then the final level of coverage that we have is what we refer to as the enterprise level of coverage. And this is where you can add that web application firewall. So we're actually monitoring your web application traffic and can actually take proactive steps to block traffic from particular IP addresses if necessary. And then the other option that's available at the enterprise level is actually having a SIEM analyst in the SOC. So not only having the SOC team proactively monitoring, but having a specific individual in our SOC that's responsible for working with you proactively. They're going to get a much deeper level of understanding of your business, your systems, your risk profile, meet with you on a recurring basis to be able to discuss ways and tactics to improve the tuning of your security system to be able to address patching and vulnerability risks in your environment, and to be able to really be that proactive coach. Think of them almost like a personal trainer that's working on a regular basis on your behalf, that's assigned to you in our Security Operations Center. And so what that means is that with this risk outcome-based approach, you can then take your various different risk tolerances and you can align that with these three different levels of coverage. So you can say, for example, I'm going to cover my laptops and workstations and my e-commerce development and test environment with the Essentials level of coverage. I'm going to cover my back office systems with Professional, but for my e-commerce platform, I really want to have that enterprise capability. I want to have that web application firewall. I want to have that assigned Security Operations Center analyst that's really proactively working, doing active threat hunting, in my environment. And what this also helps you to do is it helps you to align your budget appropriately so that you've got, a minimum level of coverage with Essentials on a broad set of assets across your environment, but you're choosing how do you want to leverage your budget to be able to cover those more critical production systems and, internet, facing applications. And then the way in which we price this is allowing you to be able to choose those different levels of risk tolerance and security coverage. So you see here, for example, our Essentials offering is meant to cover a broad range of assets across your environment. So you see the initial starting point is up to 256 nodes for $550 a month. Then when you bring in the Professional offering to be able to give you that 24/7 Security Operations Center, incident management, log management, intrusion detection capabilities in addition to what's available at the Essentials level, you see here for up to 25 nodes, that starts at $2,400 per month. And then if you want to step up to that enterprise level, if you want to add the web application firewall. You would need to already license the professional offering for up to 25 nodes, but then you can add on the web application firewall for $4,300 a month, or also add on that assigned SOC analyst for $4,500 a month. So we've really tried to price our offering in such a way to give you that flexibility to align with your various different risk tolerances. And as promised in the abstract for the webinar, you can kind of quickly do the math here. At $2,400 a month for 25 nodes times 12 months a year, this is a fraction of what it would cost you to have just one full-time equivalent person in your environment doing this kind of security monitoring and managing all the security technologies necessary to support that. Even if you are 50 nodes or 100 nodes, this is a very economical approach to being able to address your security requirements without all the effort of purchasing tooling and hiring staff to be able to maintain that tooling and monitor it. But I don't want you to just take my word for it. So we actually worked with Forrester and commissioned what they call a total economic impact study, or CEI study. And what Forrester found was that a typical AlertLogic client experiences a return on investment of almost 350% over a 3-year period, and that the investment really starts to pay back in as little as 2 months. And that truly is not atypical. We find that many of our clients are getting value within days, certainly within a few weeks. This is not the kind of multi-month, multi-year type of deployment that you typically would see with a traditional SIEM-based approach. And so before I close things out and open it up to some Q&A, I just wanted to share with you a couple quotes from a couple of our 4,000 customers. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see here a quote from Lee Ramsey at Prefy. This is a financial services company that does online pre-qualification of loans for many banks. And what Lee commented on was the point that I had made a few times during the course of the webinar, that if they hadn't gone with AlertLogic, they would have been looking at having to have multiple vendors that they would have had to evaluate, that they would have had to have contracts with, they would have had to maintain relationships and configure their tooling and so on and so forth. So Lee really saw significant value in having one core security partner in AlertLogic that Prefy could work with. And then in the upper right, you see Jerry with Trainline. Trainline is a e-commerce company focused on providing train ticketing across a variety of different railroad systems in the UK. And what Jerry commented on here is the fact that AlertLogic's offering is really designed to be cloud native. So there are many security technologies out there that were originally developed for traditional on-premise, maybe virtual machine type of deployment strategy, and they've tried to modify or adapt them to work in the cloud. AlertLogic took a different approach. We designed our offering to be cloud native from the start. So we can consume telemetry and other kinds of data from cloud platforms that really allow us to really understand the cloud platform usage and security risk at a greater level of depth. So we can consume things like AWS CloudTrails, for example, and be able to leverage that as part of the security events and the incidents that we raise. And then at the bottom of the chart here, just to highlight a couple of comments here from Forrester and Gartner talking about the ease of deployment and the ease of use of the AlertLogic approach in contrast to many of the other approaches that are out there. So last, before we go to questions, I just want to encourage everybody, if you're interested in what I've had to share with you so far today, you can take our SIEMless approach for a spin. If you go out to alertlogic.com/free trial, or just go to alertlogic.com and hit the Get Started button in the upper right-hand corner, you can sign up for a 30-day trial at no cost to you. It gives you the ability to do that vulnerability scanning and produce that threat risk index on unlimited nodes with our Essentials offering for 30 days. And then you can also have up to 5 nodes with our Professional offering, where our Security Operations Center staff will actually proactively monitor up to 5 nodes in your environment and really give you a sense of what it's like to work with our Security Operations Center, and we support this kind of a trial on AWS environments, Azure, Google, or on premises. So you can give it a spin across one or multiple environments depending upon what you have running. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ed, who's going to help facilitate the Q&A. Back to you, Ed.
Well, Matt, that was an awesome presentation. I really appreciate your time with us today. So I'll go ahead and move to our question and answer portion. We've got about 6-7 minutes, so I'm going to pick as many questions as I can. For those that we don't get to your question today, we will follow up directly with you to provide a response, in addition to providing the slides and presentation link to all attendees. So the first question is, do you support hybrid deployments?
Yes. So the way that the AlertLogic technology works is that you deploy, or we help deploy the agents and, if necessary, the software appliance for the IDS intrusion detection data, and that is deployed across multiple environments, but it all aggregates together into the incident console that I spoke about. So you don't have one incident console for each environment, but rather you have a single incident console that you can go to that will aggregate all the event and incident data across all the different environments.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. The next question is, can you talk just a little bit about the darknet? Does this product also check the darknet for client information that's available out there?
Yes, that's not officially in the offering today. We're actually today able to do that on an ad hoc basis. It's something that is on our roadmap to actually add it into the offering officially. So stay tuned. Over the course of the next couple of months, that's something that we're looking to be able to officially bring into the offering, but that is something that we currently do for some of our clients on an ad hoc basis.
And you've also talked a little bit about kind of the scalability of the product and kind of where it fits among different types of companies. Can you talk about the solution being a good fit for smaller companies, maybe one where there's just one security admin for the whole organization?
Yeah, we typically see two types of clients. We see one type of client that really looks to AlertLogic to be their primary security partner, and they may have one individual, or perhaps one or two shared resources that have other responsibilities that work with AlertLogic. So absolutely, the offering is very relevant for small size organizations. We work with startup companies that are as few as 10 to 20 employees, where that startup is trying to focus on their core business, and they don't want to be distracted from their resources being focused on their core business, and so they really look to AlertLogic to be their security partner. And then we also work with some very large enterprise organizations that are 10,000 plus employee organizations, where they look to AlertLogic to augment their existing security personnel. So they might use they might have their own SOC, for example, but their own SOC is doing, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. monitoring, and they use AlertLogic to manage the overnight and weekend hours, for example. Or they might use AlertLogic to manage the security in their cloud environments, and their internal team is taking responsibility for managing their on-premises environments. So we typically see a range of different deployments between those two extremes, but everywhere from small startups to large enterprises fit the profile for our client base.
So you talked a little bit about the information that a typical customer sees. Can you kind of run through and maybe talk through the telemetry and maybe what they can or they really should be seeing to make an effective decision?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So within the incident record itself, there are multiple levels of detail that you can drill down into. So in the case of intrusion detection data, for example, we do packet capture. So you can actually go down and look at the actual contents of the packets themselves that we have intercepted. So you can get all the way down to that granular level of detail. All of the interactions with the personnel in the Security Operations Center are also captured inside of that incident record. So not only are you looking at the event data, but you're also looking at the interactions, and you've got a record and you've got a history of the interactions with the Security Operations Center. And we find that that is very valuable data to be able to share with auditors, to be able to demonstrate how you as a client work with AlertLogic as a partner to be able to manage incident responses, because in many cases that's one of the top things that auditors will trigger as an audit finding is, do you have a defined incident management process, and can you demonstrate that that incident management process is actually being followed? So there's a range of data. It really depends on the data sources. So whether it's log data, so we can show you the parsed log data, as well as the intrusion detection data, the vulnerability scanning data, all of that inside of the incident record.
So Matt, we've got maybe one or two more questions here. I think the next one is on your pricing slide. We kind of went through essentials, professional, enterprise. I think professional had a maximum of up to 25 nodes. Is there a maximum number of nodes for the enterprise level?
So there's no maximum number of nodes. So what we do is we follow a tiered-based pricing model. So using professional as an example, the starting point for professional is up to 25 nodes. The next threshold will be up to 50 nodes. The next threshold will be up to 100 nodes. And then the way that enterprise works is you purchase either or both of the enterprise add-ons to the professional license. So let's say you licensed professional for up to 100 nodes, and then you wanted to come in and you wanted to license that web application firewall from enterprise. We price the web application firewall based on the number of web application domains that we're managing. So that option that I showed on the pricing slide for 4,300 includes the initial web application domain, and then if you needed to purchase additional web application domains, those would be something that you could buy, and then the assigned security analyst is just a single flat fee. So if you've got up to 25 nodes with professional, or up to 100 nodes with professional, doesn't matter, or up to 1,000 nodes with professional, you just buy that assigned SOC analyst add-on, and that applies to all the nodes that you've licensed with professional.
Well, Matt, again, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone on the webinar that's joined AlertLogic today. I know there's a number of questions still outstanding. What we'll do is follow up with you directly to provide a response in addition to providing the slides. So, again, appreciate it, and thank you very much, Matt, for your time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I hope you found it useful, and look forward to any additional follow-ups, and go and give it a try at alertlogic.com/free trial, or hit the Get Started button on our homepage.